Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Welcome to another episode of A Piece of Cake with my beloved brother and host over there. Please introduce yourself.
Abdurraheem Green. And of course, in the other corner is the esteemed Dr.
Abdul Haqq Baker.
Dr. B. Dr. B. I love that. Dr. B. So, bro, what are we talking about today? We continue our conversation. You got a surprise for me. What is it you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think we covered some really good areas in the last two episodes. And I wanted to sort of hone in and say, right, okay, identity. What does it mean to be a Muslim? Okay, and we're not just talking from our perspectives. What are the external perspectives of us as Muslims? Because we're not a homogenous group. Okay, the isms and schisms are more to the fore than anything else. Even when it comes to us celebrating Eid and things, but there is a unity of thoughts. Wa alaikum salam, Sister Tavia, brother Reactionary. Good to see you with us. So now we've spoken about. Last week, I started touching upon identity constructs. We had some very deep reflections and thoughts. But let's talk now identity from the perspective of Muslims. Now, I want to jump in at the point that when I was reading yesterday, Surah Hajj, I was reading one of the tafsirs regarding that, and it goes into detail about the creation of the fetus. Okay, envelopes of darkness and things like this. And again, all we learn from that are about male and female. And when being born now, moving away from that particular reference, we're born upon our fitra, our natural state. And the conversation comes now, we refer to ourselves either as reverts or converts. So who are we? Abdurraheem, who are the Muslims? Who are we? What is our identity? And I want to speak from, I'm going to say microcosmic perspective, if we're talking from the UK. Muslims, and then a macro context as an ummah. So I've thrown a lot there. Let's do it.
Well, it's really interesting that you raised this, because it's exactly what I was thinking about before the show, right? I was thinking about identity in general, right? Like, it was very interesting. I had the son of a friend of mine and his wife came to visit me yesterday, and they're like going into the countryside to do some biking together, which I thought was quite romantic, because they know I'm really into biking. And it was like she said, "Oh, when did you become a mountain biker?" I think that's the question she asked, and it was very interesting. Is that, what is the difference between doing something, riding a bike every now and then being a mountain biker? And like, there's a whole culture behind it and, whatever. But I sort of boiled it down to, I think that you identify yourself with something when it becomes a really big part of your life. It's like it's like something that takes up a lot of your time in terms of your actual time. And also you think about it a lot. And I think that that's maybe the key, the key thing. But I think when it comes to, and it's interesting, like any group of people, whether they're homosexuals or whether they're conservatives or liberals or, left wing, right wing, whatever, they probably will have amongst themselves a sort of agreed set of values that you have to adhere to those values to be considered to be part of that group, right? For example, it wouldn't make any sense for a person could say, I'm a conservative, and then they start espousing the ideals of communism, right? Because there's certain things that it contradicts the term, right? And I think that's very important. And the crazy thing is, Abdul Haqq, bro, we're living in a world where all of these terms are becoming more and more blurred, right? And what we see happening is people, you used to be able to know what it means to be conservative. But when David Cameron came along and legalized gay marriage in the UK, right? A lot of people were left scratching their heads like, what does it mean to be conservative? There's certain values that you would expect conservatives in general to be hanging on to and fighting against. I mean, you know, you the very last thing you'd expect is them to introduce something like that. You understand? I mean, they might not oppose it, but you certainly wouldn't expect them to introduce it. I think that the same thing is happening even with the Islamic identity. What does it mean to be a Muslim? I don't think it means anything in the minds of, of course, I think it means something, right? But what I mean is today, it's one of those things. It's just anyone can feel free to identify themselves as a Muslim, and it's like no one even objects to it. And the thing that, bro, the thing that really shocked me. You remember the Bosnia conflict, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And I think Bosnia is a classic example of people who are being killed simply because they somehow identified themselves with being Muslim. And I remember watching this clip. They were interviewing this woman soldier in the Bosnian Muslim army, right? And she said, "I'm an atheist Muslim." Right? I'm a Muslim and I'm an atheist. And that really just about summarizes how ridiculous the world has become. Right. Yeah. And how ridiculous everything has become. When a person, because the word Muslim means in Arabic someone who submits to God. How can you submit to God if you don't believe in God?
Exactly.
But yet that person didn't even, bat an eyelid. I'm a Muslim and I'm an atheist. Because Muslim was just some vague ethnic identity. Right. Now, if we want to actually, get down to it and start defining what is a Muslim, it's not difficult. It's very, very difficult. I mean, it's there within the meaning of the word. It means you submit yourself to God. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily, if it meant it in absolute terms, no one would be Muslim, because everyone commits sins by night and by day. And therefore, if you committed a sin, you're not submitting yourself to God. Therefore, you could say you're not a Muslim, right? Because you commit sins. But so that's not what it means. But it means that at least that you recognize, and I think this is the important thing, you recognize the supremacy of obeying God in your life. Whether you succeed in doing it or not is not the main point. The main point is that you recognize that what God has legislated, what God has commanded, is the most important thing, and that you should attempt to live your life by it. And that if you fail, you should repent for it and try and correct yourself. And I think in the very, very broadest terms, and when we say submit to God, we mean submit to God as in what God has revealed in the Quran and the life example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, I'm sure, Abdul Haqq, bro, people are going to argue that about a whole load of stuff. But as far as I can understand, at the very, very base level, if you break it down to its base level, that's what being a Muslim means. And I think what is very important then is there are certain things that you have to understand are simply not compatible. That there are certain things that if you say them just by saying it or just by believing it or adhering to it, you nullify, you take yourself out of being within that group of people who are actually Muslim. You break the identity. So one thing, I remember, and this is not uncommon, but I remember my ex-wife, one of her friends, her sister, right, once said, "I'm a Pakistani first and a Muslim after," as an example, right? I'm not picking on Pakistanis. People think maybe I'm just picking on Pakistanis the whole time, yeah? But I'm not doing that. It's just the example I'm familiar with. But anyone who says that is not a Muslim. You can't be a Muslim and say that. Not any more than you could say, "I'm an atheist Muslim." Because by definition, being a Muslim you have to understand certain things. And one of those is that God is supreme. Obedience to God is above everything else. How can you be something else first and then Muslim after? Right? You can't be. It's not possible. You can't be black first and Muslim after. You can't be white first and Muslim after. You can't be British first and Muslim after. You can't be. That contradicts Islam. That contradicts what the whole meaning of being a Muslim actually means. It goes against a fundamental understanding of being Muslim. And that would also go for certain other things as well, right? There's certain things you simply can't identify yourself as because it would contradict what it means to be Muslim. And I think in the topic of identity, Abdul Haqq, bro, that's the key point.
Now, that's really important what you said there. And I want to come back on our other esteemed brother shares the same surname, and I know you're not related except as brothers in Islam, Dr. Khalid Green. Assalamu alaikum, brother Khalid. He's agreeing with you there. I think terms become subjective and do not reflect reality. And a person who claims to be Muslim but nullifies or negates the precepts of Islam is not a Muslim. Exactly what you were saying, I think. So Jazakallah khair, brother Khalid, for that. But also before then, on a broader context as well, Hassan, can you put up who it was who said that we are humans? First of all, yeah, a wise gamer. We are humans. It's as simple as that. And thank you for that input, wise gamer. And I want to touch upon what you said there. And yes, we are humans, but you know what? That's not how some let's say constituencies hold others. For example, me. Afropean, black people, African American, as you want to say, were not considered to be human. Okay, right down from the perspective of eugenics, we were not considered to be human. You've got in the American Constitution that black people or slaves, former slaves, were considered 3/5 human. So I'm glad that Wise Game was brought this up, because this is how much it goes down to the core that you've got other humans nullifying or negating the humanness of other human beings. We have human rights, for example. Okay, you have animal rights, you have human rights. Some humans are treated closer to those doctrines enshrined in animal rights. So identity is really, really important. And I think, Abdurraheem, what you've said, and I think the premise of how we started and how we're concluding this three-parter is really, really important, because distinction of identity should first and foremost come from the creator, the lawmaker, what he says. Okay, and what he has stated. And so you're right. You've challenged me in a sense there, because when I'm asked, "Who are you?" I say I'm Black British Muslim. And I'm not saying that to negate the Islam or put it further behind. But I think I'm going to flip that in the future and start off with the Muslim aspect, because what you said.
I want to interject here, bro. I feel I have to interject something very important. Yeah, and Wise Gamer has raised the point, and you, as usual, bro, mashallah, push forward the conversation. I think what's very important here is to make a distinction between classification and identity, right? So, there's a classification as you as a male, and there's a classification as you as, whatever it may be, Afro-Caribbean or Anglo-African or black, or me as white, or whatever it may be. It doesn't really matter. The point being is there's a certain thing that whereas there is a classification. Yeah, so when he says we are human, absolutely. And in a sense, we are all human, but it's not but now the question is, what do you mean by human? If when you say we are human, all you are doing is classifying us as opposed to chimpanzees or gorillas or, or some other primate, or, cats and, snakes, fine. Right? Yes, we are all human, but I don't think that's often what people mean. When they say we are human, they presume with that there is some type of moral, some intrinsic moral meaning to that word human that goes along with it, right? Oh, we're human, therefore such and such, therefore this and that. And as you quite rightly pointed out, Well, that's not universal, is it? Because black people were treated in even in the US Constitution as less than completely human, right? So that now we're talking about something different. The same thing when you say identify, if I classify myself as British, just being that's the place where I live and that's the place I reside and that's the place I was born, that's fine. But it's not just that, is it? It comes along with that Britishness that, you know, Theresa May wanted to now sort of ridiculously establish some sort of idea of what Britishness was, which if you asked everybody, no one agreed with her definition anyway, right? Right. But there is this idea of of Britishness, right? Now that is something different because you're not just now identifying, you know, that's what the passport I hold, right? You are now saying along with that comes a set of values that you have to hold to and adhere to, right? This is where the problem comes in. And I guess a lot of this gender stuff is more about, it's more about these values, right? Which I can understand in many cases are problematic. It's as if you are female, therefore you should do this and this and this and this and this, right? You are male and therefore you should be like this and this and this and this. And it's not always bad that people may object to or protest or rebel against those particular definitions or those particular values that people have set for male and female. That's one of the things that Islam did. Islam came and revolutionized the approach of the Arabs and actually most of the ancient world towards women, right? And just by the Quran saying believing men and believing women, you know, and kept mentioning women along with men in terms of their rights and responsibilities. This is pretty much unheard of, right, in the ancient world. So that when the Prophet said, women are the twin halves of men, you know, that everything, meaning that everything that Allah has ordered with men, He's ordered with women. These are quite revolutionary ideas. There were people in the Christian church as many as 200 years ago still debating whether women had a soul or not. And if they had a soul, was it like the soul of a cat or a dog or a slave or, you know, whatever. So even women were not considered, you know, by some Christian denominations to not be fully human. The point that I'm being is that I think when you say you're Black, British, Muslim, right, there's a difference between, categorization and identity, right? Now, the problem is if you say I'm Black, and by that means, therefore, I have these values, I behave like this, I have these attitudes, right? And this is what is important to me, then you can't be Black first like that and then Muslim after, yeah? If you say by British, you mean I'm like this and this and this and this, and I have these values and I have these things, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those things. I'm not saying they're wrong, but you can't prioritize them over being Muslim, because part of being a Muslim means that what Islam teaches and what Allah has ordered is more important than anything else. Anything else is shirk, because therefore what you are doing is you are giving to some human identity a status and a level above what Allah has ordered us with. It's as if you're saying human man-made things are better than what God has revealed. So you're just saying what's implicit in that is that whatever we human beings come up with is somehow better than what God has revealed. That would be ridiculous. That would be just as ridiculous as saying I don't believe in God.
However, that is interesting, and I'm with you for the most part on the import of why you would put whatever before Muslim, and as I said, I like that. That's really interesting to look at. However, we have Surah Hujurat where Allah tells us He made us into tribes and nations so that we may know each other. So from that perspective, Muslim, the identity that Allah has given us is clear. But having those delineations in being Black, as you know, I like to use the term Afropeanism or Afropean now because of what it encapsulates. But having cultural habits and mores, as you said, Britishness comes with British. As you said, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that by virtue of being Muslim, what has happened to some of us is that in becoming Muslim, have tried to eschew and remove those aspects that make us who we are from a cultural delineation perspective. And from where I'm sitting, that's actually in contradiction to that ayat by default that we've made you into tribes and nations so that you may know each other. We can hold on to those cultural mores and customs and everything like that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, unless, as you said, we're placing those as a priority above our deen, above the religious values, ideology, and underpinning that should be there. And I feel that some who try to strip away everything, and I find that amongst some of the, let's say, black brothers that I know in the UK and in America, saying that moving away from anything cultural, anything to do with color. And again, coming to the point that you mentioned, I'm identifying myself as black, is a very good point that you made there, Abdurraheem. Am I talking about phenotype? Because then it's the classification. Or am I talking about blackness and what it encapsulates to me as a being, as a human being? And that moves me on to, I know we haven't got much time because of Maghrib, this is a short session. That moves me on to Reactionary raised some good points. He said, can we be human first before being Muslim? And I think I understand what he's saying there, because remember, the rest of the creation, except us and the jinn, are Muslim. They submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So is that a classification again, that if we being Muslim and being human before Muslim, or is Muslim when we're looking at the context of the Quran? And that's what we have to talk about. The Quran is not speaking to the animals and any other aspect of creation. We know that it impacted upon the jinn. We have Surah Jinn, the 72nd surah, that speaks about that. But when we're talking within the context of the Quran, then Muslim is intrinsically human.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, if you go back to what I was saying before, I would say the question doesn't really mean anything, right? Because we're talking about two different things. That's why I said, do you mean you're human in terms of a classification, right? Muslim is a way that you choose to live. So you can't be human first. It doesn't mean anything to say I'm human first, then Muslim, because human is just saying I'm a human being, but like I said, most people don't mean that. And then I would say, no, if you mean by human, along with that, you have a group of characteristics or a group of character traits that you think humans are supposed to have. And by the way, if you don't have those character traits, you're an animal or worse than an animal, right? Because that's what comes from that, right? They say, oh, these people are not human. Look at them. They eat with their hands. They're not human. They walk around naked. They're not human. Their faces are black. Yeah. Because that's what some people would say.
Right.
Right. And that sort of dehumanization is as old as the hills. That's how you allow yourself to hate other people, to think they're lesser than you, and then go and kill them. That's what dehumanization is all about. Right? When you have an idea of what a human is, right? It's not just a classification, a genus. Yeah. You are saying that, you don't possess certain characteristics, and because you don't possess them, you're not worthy of the title human. You're a cockroach. You're, whatever, right? That's the beginning of genocide, right?
So they're not to interject that, just to endorse what you're saying. That's one of the things that came to my mind approaching this subject the last week when I was unfortunately ill. We couldn't continue, but what you're saying, you mentioned genocide. Yeah. And we're talking genocide around a people, an identity. Exactly what you said, that the dehumanization takes place first. And one of those ways is to remove aspects of those populations, those communities' identity. And there was discussion just over a week ago when we saw the Quran burning in Sweden. And a question, a paper was written, I shared, was raised asking, is this the beginning of genocide? Because we've seen historically in the annals of history, we saw what happened to the Jewish faith. We've seen what happened when Genghis Khan moved into the Muslim lands, the burning of books, the destruction of heritage in that respect there, because you're trying to erase, not deface, erase that heritage, that identity. And the next stage, as you said, is genocide. So my question to you, or what coming back to you as we draw to a conclusion, the interesting thing here is, if anyone thought if any system thought that they could erase Islam via the Quran, this shows the beauty and the perfection of the deen that Allah has given us, because He has underscored and has stated in the Quran that He will preserve it. That's enough for us. That's one thing there. Secondly, we know, and it's said often, if all of the Qurans, the written, the text that we have that we read in our hands or digital, if all of that was removed, the preservation of the Quran in the hearts of many Muslims, having memorized or knowing particular parts of it, would give that continuity, not because we're wonderful individuals, but because Allah has preserved it in that regard. So it is I will say this boldly, it is impossible to remove that aspect of Muslim identity, the Quran. It is impossible. And I cannot say that about any other faith, any other walk of life that exists. I hope you agree with me on that. It's actually impossible, because only from Allah will it be taken up, nothing else. So
I think it's impossible in general terms. It's not impossible in specific terms, and we've seen it historically. We've seen Islam erased almost, well, not completely, but almost completely. It happened in the Spanish Inquisition. I think that's the first place we found it happen, in the Reconquista with Ferdinand and Isabella, and they, what we know in the Inquisition, they literally wiped out Muslim identity from people and forcefully converted them, tortured them, so on and so forth. It happened in communist. It happened in communism, except for very, very few people. Very few. They, mashallah, some really brave souls somehow managed to hang on to, their Qur'ans and hid them and still taught their kids. But I think, for by and large, you'll find there is countries, and you see Turkey, where, for example, is another example where that was it was the center of the Muslim caliphate for 300 years, or for maybe less than that. But now you have a good, huge, massive part of the population who hate Islam. They hate it. I mean, they don't just, that's a secularization project that has,
very true, but collectively,
so I think we shouldn't be complacent. Yeah, in general terms, you're right. Allah has preserved the Quran. There will always be people, but let's be complacent that, thinking that some guy burning the Quran is, they will never get rid of the, no, I think Muslims in Europe should be very concerned, and I think they should start preparing, waking up, and and wake up from their slumber, and we shouldn't be complacent like that. The same way the Sahaba, by the way, they, yes, Allah promised to preserve the Quran, but they still compiled the Quran into one book, which had not been done before. When the Huffaz were dying and being killed in battle, they made efforts to preserve the Quran. So although what you said is absolutely true, it should not be said from the point of view of being complacent. We can say it from a point of view of pride, that Allah will, alhamdulillah, preserve this religion. But on the other hand, as Muslims, we have to realize we have to do our part. So when the likes of Joseph Smith came along spouting his lies and distortions, we did what we could to refute that and try and quash those, those doubts and misconceptions that they were spreading. So we got to struggle. We got a big struggle, and I believe this whole question of identity. I want to say to, just quickly, bro. I just want to say to all. I just do want to say to all the Muslims, because you've come back to UK recently, and I've come back to UK recently, and I do believe that everybody who is staying in this country, right, and has not fled, and lots of people have left, right, and they don't want to come back. And by the way, I'm talking about even white people, right, even non-Muslims I'm talking about. But I think if you want to stay in this country, we have a very hard fight. And I don't mean obviously I don't mean a physical fight. I'm not talking about taking up arms. I think we have a very big struggle, and I think we have to find allies, and that you just can't sit back and think you can have a chilling, relaxing life. If you want this country to retain any semblance of decency like it used to have, which the sort of things that actually really probably were British values once upon a time. We're gonna have to struggle really, really hard. And I think there are some extraordinary people who you think are our biggest enemies actually saying that actually maybe we need to work with the Muslims. What do you feel about that, bro?
No, I think you thanks for that clarification. I think what you're saying about I think communities, not nations, but communities being wiped out, yes, and not to fall onto complacency while we know the Quran is going to be preserved. And I think Reactionary made a very good point. And I agree with you, Reactionary. They're not burning the Qurans and destroying the Qurans to efface them, to remove them or wipe them out completely. They're doing it to humiliate. And this is the thing now. This humiliation would not have taken place if the Muslims, if we were not in the state that we're in. And Abdurraheem, remember when we used to go up and down the country giving the dawah, and I'll come to the point you've mentioned very shortly, and we bring that hadith where we were told that the nations will come and gather around your lands, around you Muslims, like you guests gather around a dish to consume this. And they asked the question and said, will we be few in number? And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, you will be as numerous as the foam on the sea. And then he spoke about what that the trial that will befall us as Muslims, and we're looking at that now. And he said that we will be like the foam, the scum on the sea. That's how numerous. But
it's wahan, so wahan, love of life,
been taken from us. And they asked, what is wahan? And he said, hubbul dunya wal khara'itul maut. Love of life, hatred of death. Meaning that we're just so enamored with the dunya, the cars, the money, the fame, everything like this. And if you look at the Muslims today, if you look at us in the UK today, if you look at some of what's being done with the dawah, the edutainment aspects that are being done there and what's happening, and this is at the expense of non-Muslims looking and seeing, look at the internecine fighting that's taking place, and the Muslims, they're almost enjoying it. What takes place on Hyde Park, Abdurraheem, there's some good work that takes place, but you and I know Hyde Park was totally different to what it is now. Leicester Square, where we used to go, totally different to what it is now. So not knocking those who are going there. There are those who are putting in some very, very good work. But as Reactionary has said, the book's been burnt, the kitab is being burnt, and we're being humiliated in that regard there. And the response is not to go and burn other books or to go and riot and to go and smash up places and kill people and stuff like that. We have to look at the prophetic sunnah, but we've also got to be a lot more proactive. Yes, we're back here, Abdurraheem, and I've come back and I'm looking at certain things. I'm thinking, whoa, I've been away 20 years. It's as though like I'm like an alien coming back to the UK and thinking, what on earth has happened? I was back and forth, obviously, but living here and
living is different. Yeah,
totally different. So, do you know what, Abdurraheem? I think I'll leave you to give some conclusive words. I know this has been short.
I think you gave some really good conclusive words. I think you concluded it very well, bro. Honestly, I think you concluded it very well. I think what you said hits the nail on the head. I think, brothers and sisters, let's just not be complacent, and we need to think hard about how we can work together. We've always said it though, deeply part of what we do as Muslims is being concerned about the welfare of humanity, the well-being of society. We always want the best for everybody, whoever it may be. In some cases people may think that we hate them or something. No, it's not about hatred. It's not about phobia. It's just about wanting the best for people, and what we believe is the best for people is to follow the guidance of Allah. That's the reality. That's the best way.
Jazakallah khair, Abdurraheem.
Barakallah fiqh, bro. It's been a pleasure as usual. Obviously, because of Maghrib, it's getting dark outside. We have to cut it a bit short today.
And inshallah, we're looking to start an hour earlier, so not half an hour earlier.
Yeah, 7:30 next week. Yeah, inshallah, if that's okay with Hassan as well. So we'll start at 7:30.
Definitely. Jazakallah khair, bro.
Oh, next week I might not be able to do it because we're doing the new Muslim retreat that IRA does like a couple of times a year. So I might be busy with that.
Where is that?
That is going to be in Chester, somewhere near Chester. Yeah. So if there's I think there's still some places, by the way, if anyone knows any new Muslim.
I might come along as a new Muslim.
I think you wouldn't count, bro. You're a die, bro. You know, you want to count for the. But if anyone doesn't, there might still be a few places. So sorry to pitch that. You know, like do a quick plug there, bro. Anyway, bro, I know you have to pray. I have to pray. It's been a pleasure as always.
Likewise.
From my brother, Dr. Baker, Dr. B,
and from my brother, Sheikh Dream.
Oh, I'm shaking. I'm shaking.
No,
all right, bro.
I'll see you the week after next.
Inshallah, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi
wa barakatuh.